You might think you know Jin-woo Sung, the Shadow Monarch, unstoppable, cold and cool as hell. But trust me, there are secrets about him that even hardcore solo leveling fans often miss. Stick around because Factory might completely change how you see him. In this video, we're breaking down 10 surprising facts about Jin-woo Sung that'll give you a deeper look into his character, his hidden struggles, and even some behind-the-scenes details from the author. By the end, you'll see solo leveling's protagonist in a whole new light. Here's something that might surprise even longtime solo leveling fans. Jin-woo Sung, yes, the mighty Shadow Monarch himself, wasn't originally named Jin-woo at all. When the author Chu Gong first began outlining the story, he used a simple placeholder name for the protagonist. It wasn't anything meaningful, just a stand-in, so he could focus on building the plot and the world around it. But as the story evolved and the character of this underdog hunter started to take shape, Chu Gong realized that the name needed to carry more weight. It had to resonate with Korean readers, stay true to cultural norms, and most importantly, reflect the hidden depth of this character, who would go from the weakest hunter imaginable to someone who could command death itself. That's how Sun Jin-woo was born. In Korean naming conventions, the family name comes first, so Sung is his surname and Jin-woo is his given name. But what's even more interesting is the meaning layered into it. The name Jin-woo can be interpreted as precious or true brilliance, which is incredibly fitting when you think about his arc. At the start of the series, Jin-woo looks anything but brilliant. He's frail, constantly injured, and pretty much the last person you'd expect to become humanity's greatest protector. But hidden within was a spark waiting to ignite, a brilliance that would only reveal itself under the harshest trials. So in a way, Chu Gong gave us a small piece of foreshadowing right there in the name. Before Jin-woo ever stepped into that double dungeon and signed his life over to the mysterious system, his destiny was already quietly written into the very letters of his name. It's details like this that show just how much thought went into crafting solo leveling, long before it became the global phenomenon it is today. Alright, fact 9 might actually surprise you once you think about it. Jin-woo's appearance was meant to be painfully average. At the start of solo leveling, he's basically the guy you'd expect to bump into at a convenience store buying instant noodles at 2 a.m. Pale, underfed, and honestly kind of exhausted looking. The author and artist went out of their way to make sure this E-rank hunter didn't look remotely like a future world-ending powerhouse. Now here's the cool part. Even as Jin-woo levels up, packing on muscle, getting taller, and suddenly pulling off that long black hunter coat like it's a runway piece, his features are still surprisingly understated. They didn't turn him into some towering mountain of muscle like Baki or slap on dragon armor just to scream main character. That subtlety was intentional. Jin-woo's design is almost minimalist, and that contrast makes him way more intriguing. He's the kind of guy who could blend into a crowd until the crowd starts noticing the literal sea of shadow soldiers lining up behind him. And it plays beautifully into his personality too. Even after becoming the Shadow Monarch, Jin-woo's expressions stay mostly calm, almost unreadable. It's like he's quietly thinking, am I gonna summon 1,000 undead knights today? Or maybe just grab some ramen first. That's why when he does finally smirk or give a cold glare, it hits 10 times harder. The power's not in giant muscles or glowing eyes. It's in that eerie calm before he turns a battlefield into a graveyard. So next time you see Jin-woo standing there looking like the chillest guy at the party, remember, that was on purpose. His nothing special look only makes it more shocking when he literally tears reality apart with a wave of his hand. Honestly, that's a flex all on its own. Fact 8 gives us a peek behind the curtain and straight into the author's own guilty pleasures. Jin-woo's relentless drive to grind levels, chase quests, and scoop up loot drops like his life depends on it, well, that's not just clever writing. It actually comes from Chu Gong's personal experience with being, let's just say, very invested in MMORPGs. The whole concept of this system, daily quests, experience bars, even penalties for skipping your homework, was inspired by the author's late nights glued to online RPGs. You know the type. Telling yourself just one more dungeon until the sun's coming up. So in a way, Jin-woo is basically Chu Gong's RPG alter ego, living out the ultimate power fantasy, but with, slightly higher stakes. Instead of farming boars for leather scraps, Jin-woo's out here solo clearing dungeons and harvesting the shadows of everything he defeats. And it's also why the story nails that addictive game-like progression so well. The system feels less like a vague magical plot device and more like a genuinely brutal game mechanic. Miss your daily quest? Too bad. Health penalties for you. Want to level up? Gotta grind just like the rest of us plebs. But unlike us, Jin-woo actually gets absurdly OP for his trouble. Meanwhile, we're stuck celebrating when we find a slightly better sword with +2 attack. So next time you see Jin-woo slicing through monsters and immediately checking his new stats, remember, that's not just him being a meticulous hunter. That's basically every RPG addict's dream come to life. Power leveling so hard, reality itself can't keep up. Fact 7 is one of those subtle truths that makes Jin-woo such a compelling character, because even after becoming one of the most powerful beings in existence, he never completely shakes off his old fear. Remember, Jin-woo didn't start out fearless or cocky. He was that E-rank hunter, trembling in dungeons, praying he'd make it home without losing a limb. Those early near-death experiences weren't just physical. They carved deep scars into his mind. And here's the interesting part. Even when he evolves into the Shadow Monarch and starts one-shotting giant bosses like their cardboard cutouts, tiny traces of that fear still pop up. In the novel especially, there are moments where he pauses and you can almost feel a ghost of that old dread creeping back in, like muscle memory for terror. It's such a cool layer to his character. Instead of flipping a switch and becoming this emotionless juggernaut, Jin-woo remains human in little ways. Sometimes it's a quick intake of breath before a fight, or a faint unease stepping into an unfamiliar gate. It's also kind of poetic. Even with an undead army at his beck and call and powers that literally warp reality, there's still this leftover vulnerability, almost like his old self is quietly whispering, "Hey, remember when we almost died to a goblin? Good times." And that tension is what makes him relatable. Sure, we might not be slicing through interdimensional monarchs, but who doesn't still get anxious over things we've struggled with in the past? So next time you see Jin-woo calmly walking into battle, just know that somewhere inside, the scared E-ramp kid is still there, even if he's now covered head to toe in Shadow Monarch swag. Fact 6 is actually one of the biggest what-if scenarios behind solo leveling, because, believe it or not, Jin-woo's mother wasn't always supposed to survive. In the original planning stages of the story, Chu-gong actually considered letting her illness run its course. The idea was that her death would fuel Jin-woo's transformation even harder, pushing him into a darker, more revenge-driven path. But somewhere along the way, that plan changed, and thank goodness it did. Instead of becoming a tragic side note, Jin-woo's mother turned into one of the most emotionally grounding parts of the story. Her miraculous recovery after Jin-woo takes on the system isn't just a touching subplot, it's one of the reasons he keeps fighting so hard. It also shows a different side of him. For most of solo leveling, Jin-woo is either stone cold, facing enemies, or methodically strategizing, like some raid boss in human form. But with his mother, he's just a son, worried, hopeful, and relieved beyond words when she finally opens her eyes. It's pretty telling that even after he gains the power to flatten entire guilds, one of his first true moments of happiness is simply seeing her awake and healthy again. And honestly, this change probably saved Jin-woo from becoming a full-on tragic anti-hero. Instead of only fighting because he's lost everything, he now has someone to come home to, a living piece of his old life that reminds him of what he's actually protecting. So yeah, behind all those epic boss fights and shadow armies, there's this quiet thread of family that might have vanished entirely if Chu-gong had stuck to his first draft. Kind of makes you appreciate those hospital scenes a whole lot more, right? Alright, if you made it to this point, hidden message time. Drop a monarch of snacks in the comments. Everyone else will just think you're weird, which you probably are, but we'll both know why. Alright, fact 5 dives into one of the coolest, most subtle shifts in solo leveling. Something you might not notice right away unless you're really paying attention to how Jin-woo talks and thinks. After Jin-woo becomes the vessel of the Shadow Monarch Ashborn, it's not just his stats that change. His inner voice, literally the way he thinks, starts to evolve too. You'll catch these moments in both the novel and manhwa where he slips into this almost regal, commanding tone. It's like his internal monologue goes from, "I need to beat this boss," to "This being shall kneel before my authority." Okay, maybe not that exactly, but you get the point. There's this creeping grandeur to his thoughts and speech, and it's a quiet hint that Ashborn's personality isn't just tagging along, it's slowly merging with Jin-woo's own. And that's honestly kind of spooky. Imagine if suddenly your inner voice sounded less like you and more like some ancient shadow king who's seen countless worlds die. It adds this extra layer of tension, how much of Jin-woo is still purely Jin-woo, and how much is now shaped by the Shadow Monarch's will. But what makes it so effective is that he doesn't fully lose himself. Even when he issues these dark, almost archaic lines in battle, there's still the old Jin-woo underneath, protective, methodical, and quietly stubborn about doing things his way. It's a perfect little character study tucked inside all the flashy fights. The story doesn't just show him getting stronger physically, it subtly questions what it costs him on a deeper level. So yeah, next time you see Jin-woo coolly telling an S-rank threat to submit to my shadows, think about how that's not just bravado, it's partly Ashborn peeking through, and the result is this fascinating blend of two beings in one, which makes Jin-woo so much more than your typical OP protagonist. All right, fact 4 is one of those tiny details that somehow makes Jin-woo feel way more human, literally. Despite becoming the Monarch of Shadows, someone who can summon armies of the dead with a snap and go toe-to-toe with beings that could flatten entire cities, Jin-woo still gets hungry. Yep, even after all his insane power-ups, his body is still at the end of the day fundamentally human. The story sprinkles in these understated moments, like him returning from a brutal fight with monarchs, or clearing some nightmare tier gate, and then casually sitting down to demolish a huge meal. It's such a low-key contrast. One minute, he's reaping the shadows of colossal beasts that would give Kaiju number 8 nightmares. The next, he's practically inhaling rice bowls like a college student who blew all his money on gaming instead of groceries. And honestly, it's kind of grounding. It reminds us that no matter how godlike Jin-woo gets, there's still this very normal human operating underneath all the dark energy and monarch flair. It also highlights just how hard his body is constantly working. Even supercharged with mana and shadow power, he needs real fuel to keep going. Plus, it's one of those fun little writing choices that subtly tugs him back from being a full-on deity. He's terrifying, sure, but at the end of the day, he still needs to sit down and eat or he'll get lightheaded like anyone else. So next time you see Jin-woo standing stoically on a mountain of shadows, just picture him 5 minutes later absolutely destroying a plate of pork cutlet. Even the Monarch of Shadows can't solo his way out of basic human needs. Fact 3 is one of those details that turns solo leveling from a simple power fantasy into something a lot more epic and a bit unsettling. Here's what most casual fans miss. Jin-woo's power as the Shadow Monarch isn't just huge, it's actually too huge for Earth to handle. In the deeper lore of the story, monarchs and rulers typically wage their wars in entirely different realms. The reason's pretty straightforward. If they fought on a normal planet, their sheer energy and dimensional influence would quite literally rip it apart. The laws of physics, gravity, even time itself aren't designed to cope with forces like theirs. But then we have Jin-woo, who decides to stay right on Earth, bringing with him a power meant for cosmic battlefields. It's not just about flashy gates opening or the occasional monster raid anymore. The entire balance of Earth starts buckling under the weight of Jin-woo's existence. That's why the final stretch of the story feels so catastrophic. Reality itself is struggling to contain the magnitude of these monarch-level confrontations. What makes this fascinating is how it reframes Jin-woo's heroism. Usually when a character becomes ultra powerful, it's framed as the ultimate good thing for their world. But here, it's almost a double-edged sword. Jin-woo is strong enough to protect humanity, yet by staying, he's also endangering the very planet he's trying to save. It gives his journey this subtle layer of tragedy and inevitability. No matter how noble his reasons, the story suggests that a force like Jin-woo's was never meant to coexist peacefully with Earth. At some point, either he would have to leave or the world itself might break trying to hold him. That twist turns what could have been just another OP protagonist story into something that feels a lot grander and a little more haunting. Fact 2 is a bit of behind-the-scenes genius that shows just how carefully Chugong plotted out solo leveling from the very start. It's all about Jin-woo's father. Now, for a lot of readers, the reveal that Jin-woo's dad was still alive, trapped in another dimension this whole time, hit like a complete shock. It felt like a classic late-stage twist meant to crank up the stakes. But here's the cool part. This was never just a spur-of-the-moment decision. According to interviews and some early notes, Chugong actually had the entire arc of Jin-woo's father mapped out. From the very beginning of the story, even back in the first chapters, there are small hints sprinkled in, references to his father's mysterious disappearance that felt like world-building flavor, but we're really laying the groundwork for something much bigger. This kind of long game planning is what makes Solo Leveling so satisfying on a reread. Once you know where it all leads, you start spotting the tiny breadcrumbs, the way Jin-woo reacts whenever his dad is mentioned, the offhand lines about missing hunters overseas, or even subtle looks in the manhwa panels that take on a whole new meaning. And it does wonders for Jimo's character too. His father's story isn't just an emotional hook, it deepens the themes of legacy and responsibility that run through the whole series. In a weird way, Jin-woo becoming the Shadow Monarch mirrors his dad's own secret struggle against forces far beyond normal human comprehension. It turns their eventual reunion from just a shocking plot point into something that feels earned, like two halves of a long story finally colliding. Instead of being thrown in just to surprise us, it's a reveal that pays off years of quiet buildup. Honestly, knowing this makes Jin-woo's journey feel even more epic because it was never just his battle. It was always part of something far bigger, stretching across generations and even dimensions. All right, we've made it all the way to Fact 1, and this one gets a little heavy, but in a way that totally redefines how you see Jin-woo's story. According to Chugong himself, from the earliest drafts, Jin-woo was never meant to be truly happy. That's right, even after gaining power that could make literal gods sweat, even after building an army of shadows that would make Sauron jealous, happiness was never really on the table for him. The author always intended Jin-woo's journey to explore the price of ultimate strength. Sure, he gets everything an underdog protagonist could ever want. He goes from E-rank embarrassment to unstoppable monarch. But along the way, he racks up losses, trauma, and this gnawing loneliness that no amount of power can fix. It's kind of like getting the world's best gaming PC setup only to realize all your friends have already logged off. Except, with more Death Knights and less RGB. Is actually something profoundly human about that. Even surrounded by loyal shadows who'd throw themselves into a volcano for him, Jin-woo often feels isolated. The story sprinkles in these moments where he seems almost detached from regular life, watching normal people go about their day in a way he can never fully return to. And here's a tiny dark joke. Imagine being so overpowered that your biggest problem isn't monsters showing up. It's figuring out how to smile genuinely at a dinner table without scaring everyone half to death. In the end, Jin-woo's tale is about what it costs to shoulder unimaginable power. It's thrilling, yeah, but it's also quietly tragic. That duality is exactly why his story sticks with people long after the final chapter, because beneath all the epic fights and jaw-dropping flexes, there's still a lonely young man who can't quite find the simple, peaceful life he once hoped for. All right, that's it. Facts dumped, brain overloaded. See you next time. Bye!